Hello, everyone, and welcome to our seminar today. Thanks, everybody, for being here. We are talking today about creating value in healthcare through digital transformation. My name is Dr. Andrew Gimino, and I'll be your host for this session. We got some great partners with us today who are going to help us with this discussion. And really, there's also going to be an info session where we talk a little bit about our digital transformation management program and how we think that that can help support the digital transformation that's happening inside healthcare. So with that, we're going to move on to our next step, which is just making sure that we acknowledge the important contributions made by Indigenous people to this land. And so we acknowledge the Musqueam, the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, Katzie, K'equitlem, K'ekwat, Kwantlen, Semiahmoo, and Tsawwassen peoples, on whose unceded traditional territories our campuses at Simon Fraser University reside. It's important for us to acknowledge this unceded territory because it was not created through treaty. And so we are living and operating and working here in these lands. And it's important for us to make commitments to understanding more about Indigenous ways of knowing and doing. And we can do that in many ways. And so at Simon Fraser, we make a commitment for that. So that's why we recognize this through land acknowledgement. So given that we now have respected that acknowledgement, I want to think about the agenda we have coming at us today. So first of all, we are in our welcome and introduction, and thank you so much for being here. We're looking forward to working with you, and there's going to be some opportunities for us to interact in a little while. We're going to begin with a little bit of a healthcare panel discussion. We've got three great panelists who are going to be joining me in a little bit. Then we're going to do a short program overview to make sure you're aware of the programs that we think can make an impact on healthcare here in the province. And then what we're going to do is answer questions that you have from the audience. We'll have an opportunity. You'll see something at the bottom of your screen called Q&A, and that will be an important way for us to interact. So please, as we go through the panel and discussion, if there's something comes to your head, as a question emerges, please put it in the Q&A. We'll see if we can get to it during our time frame. So given all this, I think the important thing for you to know before we get into our discussion is, where does SFU stand on this notion of digital transformation in healthcare? So one of the first things I need to let you know is that Simon Fraser University has been partnering with healthcare for over 20 years. Lots of different programming, lots of different organizations that we've worked with, and we highly respect the people in the healthcare industry and have been able to work with them in multiple ways throughout our history. And we want you to know that we're here, not just now, but in the past and also into the future, to make sure that we're providing support for the people who are in healthcare and are working towards making our healthcare a better place. So my sense is I just wanted you to know our commitment here at Simon Fraser University and some of the examples of programs and organizations that we've worked with. I think the other thing to know is that in all our programming, we've been able to serve healthcare effectively. So we've had over 1,100 healthcare leaders in customized programming, and 10% of our participating people in any of our programs have come from the healthcare industry, particularly in our open enrollment program. So I just want you to know that it's something that we're very familiar with. We're very proud of our relationship. And if I just want you to understand, we kind of understand a little bit more about what a healthcare is, the challenges it faces, and recognize and support healthcare development as we move through. So this is one of the examples to do this through this kind of a panel discussion. And finally, I think before we get into the notion of healthcare, I think what I wanted to talk about a little bit was the principles. Where do we come from when it comes to digital health? Because when you talk about digital health, a lot of people focus on technology. And technology is important. It's a critical element. That's why it's called digital. But I want you to know the things we're thinking about when we think about digital health are building more opportunities for patients to act as partners in this process of health development and health systems. We want to think about the guidance in regards to evaluation of whether technology is helping us or not helping us, when it can help us, the things it can help with, and the things that are best done by people. And also the very important notion that with all digital transformation, the most effective thing we can do is provide the gift of time so that healthcare professionals can be provided with the adequate time for them to serve the needs of the people that they're working with. So it's not about the technology, and we're not selling a particular technology or a particular thing when we come to our programs. What we're trying to do is how to best utilize the technology in order to make it happen. So with that, I think that gives you kind of a feeling for where Simon Fraser University is and what the Beatty School of Business has been doing in healthcare. I'd love to now introduce the people who are going to be part of our panel and get into a discussion with them a little bit about the issues that are coming your way. So first, I'll introduce the panelists. So Rachel Barker, who's a co-founder and CEO of Novametra. She's the past president and board advisor from HIMSS, British Columbia chapter. So a long-standing relationship, and thank you, Rachel, for being here. I also am going to be talking to Sheazin Premji, who's the advisor of INTEGRAiTE. She's the former executive director for the Center of Advanced Analytics and Data Science and Innovation at the Fraser Health Authority, and Carly Gao, who is a senior manager, change management and adoption for Canada Health Infoway. So tons of experience in our panel, and I'm really looking forward to a great discussion. And what we're going to do in this panel, we're going to come up with 3 questions, but we're going to start with an interaction with you, the audience. And so we're going to start with a poll. So let's open up the poll question, and that will help us kind of situate ourselves. So the poll here says, you know, when tackling your healthcare challenges today, what approaches or strategies have you been working on? Because what we're thinking about in healthcare is about creating that better patient and community kind of feeling. And no one who cares about people serving more than the healthcare workers that we have here today. So why do you think it's becoming more and more difficult to find that additional value that comes from? I know it's challenging when we add technology to the mix. So you know, why do you think it's becoming more and more difficult to create that additional value? So I'd love to hear, and if we can start with Sheazin, and then I'll move to Rachel and then Carly.
Sure, that was actually a very interesting pulse. It's kind of across the board, which I was wondering would happen. I'll start by acknowledging in terms of creating value in healthcare. I'm going to acknowledge there is burnout, so people are feeling it, and they're trying to get their heads above water. But in addition to the burnout, I think I'll kind of talk about 3 areas of consideration that come to my mind. The first one is around value from when we talk about digital transformation, it's about the data. So what you harness at the end is really the data. That's your value. Sometimes called data as gold. It truly is, but I think the gap is not having the data, it's translating it into an action. And so we have more data than we've ever had before. But the know-how, what to do with that data is actually, that gap is widening, I think, for us in terms of the healthcare system and creating that value. We're not truly a learning health system yet, and I think there's still some learnings going on what that means, on how to create that data and create those feedback loops for frontline impact. And so, how do you do this from moving away from traditional reporting practices? We know we've done that for forever. It hasn't had the impact that we wanted, and truly integrating it into digital information, into optimizing workflows or clinical decision making. And so how do you become AI savvy in some of these areas, or advanced analytics savvy? And so I think that kind of understanding and appreciating the value of that is still evolving in the system. So I think it's a curve that we're all experiencing. The second area is around the technology is actually advancing faster than the governance and leadership models. And research shows that, and including SFU's DIAL program, I'll say that because I've seen parts of it, that value actually comes from aligning, right? So you've got your data, incentives, people, process, and tech categories, and it's not just about the tools itself. And so I think many organizations are moving quickly on technology, but have not built the governance clarity and the leadership mindsets in terms of how to effectively operationalize this. And I think that governance piece is very important as we're evolving. I think it's the kindest thing you can do to your workforce is to create that clarity in terms of what those new rules of engagement are. And it's not to create barriers, but to create enablement for them to move. And then for the leadership mindset, it's really around that modern management approaches. There is a lot of new ways of doing things. And I think sometimes we slow things down because we think it's going to cost more, or have a different impact, but really what it simply does, it widens the gap between what ultimately impacts patient care. The world is moving very fast, and I think having leaders who understand the right language and understand the methodologies that need to now be employed is also an area that would create value with more learnings and people understanding the how to.
Yeah.
And
What I see is like complicated skilling for people who are already highly skilled in many areas. We're kind of asking a lot from healthcare workers, particularly people who are supporting that system type of approach. So it's a lot to take on. There's a mindset change. There's a whole bunch of other things that come along with it. So it's a challenge. I can understand it's not easy to accomplish.
I think the final point for me is really around the silos and the incentives to remove those silos. So, the funding models, the culture, I think once it comes, it scales better. Otherwise, values are packed in these silos. So that would be the last area.
And nothing does that more than budgets. So, as we all know, so fighting through those. So Rachel, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this.
Thanks, Andrew. Completely agree with Sheazin about how we're in an increasingly complex system, and the importance of alignment. So there's so many good ideas out there often, like people are coming up with things that could be incredibly beneficial for the health system, but they're either misaligned with the realities of how care works on the ground, or we really kind of struggle with sticking the landing. So it's that last piece. So you build something, it looks like it's going to work well on paper, you've met your project timelines, everyone like high fives. And then what happens after that is sometimes there's not enough resourcing or consideration given to things like implementation, adoption, or really kind of like the human factor of all of that, which is really just as important as the technology and the policy aspects, but it tends to get shortchanged. So when you're doing these sorts of transformational projects, it really needs to be factored in, planning appropriate capacity for things like supporting change management and adoption activities, training, like how are you going to actually be there for your clinicians over the post-implementation, like the next 6 months, and having the right skill sets in your organization in that area to support those activities. Really taking the time to build trust with users during and after the project so that they're not afraid to come to you and say, hey, this isn't working the way that I thought it was going to work, or this actually this specialty is really struggling with it and we need changes, and can actually have that conversation with you. And then also considering when delivering value, just the really rapid pace of change that's happening right now and struggling with change fatigue and change saturation, especially when people are looking like not just at your department, maybe the technology team, but really what's coming at them from every angle. And even like a couple years out still how exhausted people were post-pandemic, right? Factoring that in, like they got hit right away with all of these things that had been on hold, and then it's project after project after project. And people can't always absorb all of it. And some of those things are going to fail if you don't have that capacity.
Yeah, it sounds like one of the things I'm hearing from both you and Sheazin was people and their mindset and their ability to handle change. Those are all things that we need to factor into, particularly system approaches to change. So appreciate your perspective, Rachel. I know, Carly, if you want to add to that, that's what they've already highlighted quite a few things, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Absolutely. And thanks so much for having me, Andrew, and the SFU team. Completely agree with Sheazin and Rachel, on their points on the growing complexity of our healthcare system, along with the increase of burden, administrative burden that clinicians are feeling. I think definitely in my role, I work really closely with primary care providers. And so clinicians today, they're facing very complex, stressful, and busy work environments. And this is made even more difficult by the rising patient load, the workforce shortages, and then the administrative duties. So completely agree. On top of that, there's all these new technologies that are being implemented and introduced all the time, which I think are very well intended, but sometimes they can add layers of complexity when the clinical workflows are not being considered and when the technology doesn't fit seamlessly into the workflows. So I think, to kind of summarize, I think where the opportunity lies today is finding ways to reduce the friction, ease the administrative burden for clinicians and their staff so that they can do what they do best, which is, focus on patient care. And we do this by, like you said, really focusing on the people, not the technology, and involving clinicians really often and consistently throughout the implementation process so that they feel really supported through change.
I think, Carly, that kind of brings us to a second question. I'm going to come to you, Rachel, next, but when you undertake this digital transformation, it really should be a processes where you're enabling people to do the work they really have been trained to do and not do so much around the technology and the administration of it. But certainly there are times when technology has come in and we find that we're doing more with the technology and a little bit less with the people who we might be trying to serve. So I'm just wondering how you assess the benefits and where do you see the sometimes challenges that come out when we think about digital transformation? How do you do that in a way that respects the effort and hopefully the gift of time you're trying to provide to people? So Rachel, maybe if I could start with you and then I'll go to Carly next.
Sure. I mean, the first thing is really getting quite crunchy about what problem are we actually solving here. You see a lot of scenarios where, someone's executive went to a conference, they saw this really cool product, and they went golfing with the vendor rep. They come back and they're like, oh, this is great, it's gonna fix all our problems. Go take this technology and make it fix all our problems. And that usually doesn't turn out great. So really looking at what are you trying to solve here and really treating that as sort of a life cycle piece. Transformation isn't you get out the door and you're done. So thinking about things like why this and why now? What's the opportunity cost of doing or not doing it at this moment in time, right? Because people only have so much capacity, both on technical teams and with your clinicians. Are you going to run into things like change fatigue? Are you going to have capacity for your users to actually co-design this product with you right now? Because if you don't, it's not going to be a good product. It's not going to be what they need. Really readiness with these competing priorities in the healthcare environment. Is it going to conflict with other key initiatives and systems thinking lens, like going outside of your bubble, where you're like, well, this is my roadmap, this is my department's roadmap. What else is getting thrown at your clinicians? What else is getting thrown at your executives? Do you have a really good, committed executive sponsor that's willing to stand up and help you make this successful? Are you going to be able to get adoption champions out of your clinicians? Do they have the time and capacity for that? Are they being slammed by a funding model change or policy change, or is it time for them to do recertification? Just all those sorts of considerations about, is this project going to be successful now? Is this the right thing for us to be doing right now? What trade-offs are going to happen as a result of making this change? And then can we mitigate them if they need to be mitigated? Or are we willing to accept them? And is that worth it for us? In addition to looking at the actual value of the project itself. So does it have value is a good question. Also, is this the right time? Is this the right project?
Yeah, so I think I loved your crunchy thing, by the way. And the question I think is about when to get crunchy. And it feels like, Rachel, what you're telling us is do that early. Ask those questions rather than after it's been implemented. Why did we do this? Yeah, why are we doing this again? What are the benefits we're looking at? I think that's a really important thing. It's hard to do, but really critical to, I think, success. Carly, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this as well.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think from the clinical lens, it's important to ask whether the new technology or digital tool meaningfully improves the day-to-day experiences and workflows of clinicians and their staff. And as a result, the patient experience as well. Because I think technology, it should and has the ability to streamline processes and really simplify things, but it can also create additional burden if it's not implemented in the right way and if care teams don't feel adequately supported to go through that change. So I think when we're looking at the benefits and the downsides, it's important to consider, if the tool actually fits into clinical workflows, whether or not the end users have been really involved early and consistently through the implementation, and also if there's an opportunity for peer-to-peer learning and support so that clinicians can feel like they're learning from their colleagues.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think all these factors together, they determine the success of digital transformation and whether the tool actually is providing value.
So before we get to Sheazin's comment, maybe we could just bring up our second poll, which is looking at how people might feel about this particular issue in regards to, what are the ultimate concerns. So our second poll is about how confident you feel about managing and implementing digital transformation in your organization. There we go. So thanks everyone for being a part of that, showing us, I think, some pretty interesting perspectives. And maybe Sheazin, given what people have said here, what are you feeling about your thoughts on this idea of the challenge of digital transformation?
Yeah, I think there's we don't want to, I'm going to use the phrase, we don't want to digitize inefficiencies. And I think just not understanding sometimes or having that confidence in terms of how to manage and implement digital solutions and where to start. I think that's some of the challenges that we end up seeing
Right.
in terms of the success and the outcomes. And I think, the poll here actually shows that there is a desire because there's many people on here, but that know-how, I think there's an opportunity there to do that better and understand that it does start with the people. We say it, but the how and the frameworks is something different to connect it. I think intuitively we all know we need to start with people and the front line and the clinical, but how to do it, I think that's the opportunity.
Do you have an example of a success that you've seen in terms of transformation, Sheazin? And I'll come to you, Rachel and Carly, if you've got some examples as well.
So I've been very fortunate in my journey to take a team from Excel to AI implementation in a large complex health system. And so there's a lot of learnings there. And I can say hand on heart, those that came from the grassroots up were the successful projects. Those that came top down, they stumbled a lot. They ended up costing more. So I think, for me, it's around that bridge of building across people, process, tech. But we also have to recognize we're in a bit of a revolution right now between compute, communications, and creativity. Right, there's so much coming at us, and I think it's really important to ground and create that foundation where it was truly the people. So you enable them with the right frameworks. The operating models are very clear. I think governance sometimes, especially in large systems, can become challenging, but the more clarity you can create, the better these projects or these initiatives roll. And the clinicians are frontline, they know the problems, they know how to solve it. They are actually quite creative and they like to move fast. They don't like long stalled projects. So I think that's just some of the successes. And the challenges, I think, is, when the solution is brought in and that groundwork that was discussed here already hasn't been done,
Yeah.
it does get crunchy, I think, as Rachel used that word.
So Rachel, you have a quick example too, and then Carly.
Yeah, this is one of my favorites just because you often don't get to come in like right at the very beginning of something. And I not only did get to come in right at the very beginning, but also jump the fence to one of the other partner organizations halfway through. But it was the development of the provincial e-form solution. And that really started when I was at Doctors of BC with us getting together with the PHSA provincial e-health team and saying, we know this is driving physicians crazy. They hate it. It's incredibly frustrating. We are hearing from the vendors, the EMR vendors, it's driving them crazy. We think it's probably driving the form owners crazy too. Why don't we just throw everyone in a room and talk this out? And we did. We brought in the EMR vendors, we brought in clinician representation, we brought in technology representation from the team that would be developing this, we brought in forum owners, we brought in vendors, and we all sat down and said, like, is this a problem? Tell us about your pain points associated with this problem. Let's define it. Let's understand why it's happening. And then that moved into solutioning together. So really co-designing this all the way through with representation from every group and getting buy-in from every group and understanding sort of where the challenges were going to be from those people so that we could sort of design around them or figure out how to mitigate them and really have everyone on board with this. And then as that scaled, expanding the representation from the end users when we really got into design. So having not only a clinician advisory panel, but an administrative advisory panel, since MOAs were really the people often on the front end of that work.
Yeah, so that kind of lines up with what Sheazin was saying about the grassroots, building it, cooperating, co-creating these solutions with a big perspective. I think that's great. Carly, love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I was also fortunate to be a part of a national initiative that we recently supported, where Infoway provided 10,000 AI scribe licenses to primary care providers across Canada. And so I was able to support, several provinces in rolling out their program to their clinicians, including, implementation and change management support. And I think the key lesson for me was that the approach to the rollout made such a significant difference in the eventual adoption and uptake of the tool, especially because, they were all using a pretty similar tool. And it was no surprise really that, the provinces that took a really people-centered approach with a big focus on training, change management, onboarding, and giving clinicians numerous opportunities to share their feedback, they saw a much stronger adoption of the Scribe tool. And in contrast to that, implementations that took more of a technology-first approach with less emphasis on the training and support, they tended to see lower engagement.
Right. Well, I think that all makes a lot of sense. So I think where we're going now is thinking about digital transformation as serving a purpose. What I'm hearing from you is that you really have to understand what that purpose is and what we're trying to accomplish. So I think it's a good time maybe to launch a third poll, which is talking a little bit about that. And then what we'll do is, the question is, what's the biggest barrier for professional development and upskilling your team? Because in order to understand purpose, you have to also have the skills to be able to accomplish that. Here's something that's come up now for us. I think we can end that poll and share the results, which is great, showing, it's a time commitment. I think that's no surprise, is it? Uncertainty about my role. I think we've talked about that. And also the financial constraints, which are just natural part of working in almost any organization, but where healthcare becomes particularly complex. So thanks for contributing that. So now what I'm going to ask our panelists to do, and I'm going to start with you, Carly, if that's okay, is kind of what are some of the ways that you upskill and train your team to build a kind of a robust understanding of what digital transformation is going to be, and your focus on, what really matters, the purpose of it all. So I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, it's a good question. Thanks, Andrew. I think it's really important to help individuals and teams to develop, a broad set of practical skills. So things like critical thinking, stakeholder engagement, understanding clinical workflows, and also hands-on experience leading projects and implementations. I think real-world experience and exposure is really key, because I think teams, they learn the most effectively when they're being directly involved in hands-on initiatives, but also giving the opportunity for individuals to reflect on what has worked well and what needs improvement. If I may give a plug to SFU, I think programs like, DTM are also especially valuable because they do combine that practical skill building with hands-on learning experiences, which is really key to helping people develop and connecting with other peers.
Yeah, I think, Carly, that's what we found with the applied focus, where you actually are doing a project and peers are working with you to get that done. It helps to simulate that environment of co-creating and being a part of a team and a solution, and it gets you thinking system-wide. I appreciate that. We'll talk a little bit about that in a sec. But Sheazin, I'd love to hear your thoughts about how you built your team and what things are effective in helping to build these skills.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm going to also say, programs like Dial is foundational in many instances. And you do start from there because it gives you the right frameworks, the right way of thinking, and you actually see a difference. I've seen differences of participants coming back to the team. But you also establish, I'll say, a team-based culture of learning. So you talk about communities of practices, so the peers are learning from each other as well. They each bring respective practices or knowledge. So you've got your project or consulting folks learning from your technical folks and vice versa. So that shared learning space is very rich. We also encouraged, learning daily. So spend 15 minutes, maybe beginning, end of day, bookend it. There's a lot of materials online. Learn something new. And at first it doesn't, it may not make sense, but there is a compounding effect of learning something new every day or thinking about it and how you bring it back. And I think it's the practice. So it's the real-time practice. So if you've got your experts there, it's that real-time support coaching. I was fortunate. I was studying at a different institution and being able to bring some of those learnings back, and others were at different programs bringing learnings back. So it did help shape the model in which the team operated. And it's part of even, when you're working with consultants or vendors, also kind of the value add you get from them is to say, we don't want you to transact on us, but actually co-create with us and translate or transfer that knowledge over. So the
Right.
teams are learning in the space as well. So those are just some ways of developing the talent.
I love that co-creative space. I think that's a really, really important element. So Rachel, off to you for your comments about this and upskilling and teaming.
Yeah. So when I was at SE Health, they were just at the very beginning of this massive, massive digital transformation. And they had done kind of some technology projects, but never anything at this scale. And it wasn't anything where formal education had happened. And in that scenario, it was sort of this dream situation where we had very, very supportive leadership who got it and they're willing to invest in this. And we had leadership like me and then some of the executives who had the skill sets in this. And we were actually able to design this really comprehensive training that was sort of targeted based on role. And it looked at things like project management, digital transformation in the context of the work we were doing, human-centered design, agile, change management, and change leadership. But that's really uncommon that you're going to be in that situation where you have all the resources and the knowledge and the buy-in that you need to be able to create something like that, and also to get everybody through that, which is where I think programs like Dial that also bring that really comprehensive human-centered lens to transformation, and people can take in small groups together, and they can also learn from their peers who are actively doing this work in industry, really, really help fill that gap, because you're not always going to have the ability to just do it all from scratch yourself, right? But it's really important that people get that.
And so I think there's a lot to learn. I think you brought up some really essential things. So I really appreciate the time we've spent with the panels. We're going to come back to you in just a sec. What I'm going to do is just outline a little bit about our approach at Simon Fraser University using the digital technology, our transformation management program, just to talk about it. And what we'll do is I'll give you just a short program overview of that. And then after that, we're going to come to questions so people can get to the panelists in a little bit. So I'll see you in just a minute. I'm going to go into this program overview to let you know how we approach it at Simon Fraser University. Our perspective is people first. And why we do that is because we believe that, all systems begin with the people and the purposes that they're trying to work through. And then what we do is combine technology and process information so that those three things combined create this essential kind of system that we're going to be approaching when we think about a digital solution or a digital transformation. So the objectives that we have in mind, right, are things that allow us to really think about healthcare in a different way, to think about the level of leadership that we need in regards to moving things forward. I think all of our panelists have talked about the importance of leadership, the understanding that how we manage digital transformation, how we support the change, how we co-create and build those opportunities for discussion and understanding to develop are really essential. And that's why in digital transformation management program, we focus on teams and not individuals working through on solutions, because we feel we got to practice those skills and understand the complexity. And we love having technical and business people or organizational people or healthcare professionals working together to come up with these solutions. I think those different knowledge groups are really powerful when you come to final solutions. We also are thinking about how we sustain that practice. And so our focus on digital transformation and building your confidence around it, so you can understand the terminology people use and the elements that are going to be involved, but also thinking about how the industry mentorship matters a lot. So we don't just use digital transformation or business people when we think about our program. We actually bring mentors into that. And I can have Sheazin talk about that a little bit, because she's actually serving as one of our mentors in one of our programs. Just to let you know that we're trying to focus on the context that makes the difference to you. And that context, in this case, would be healthcare. And we provide mentors and support people to be able to make sure that your people are understanding where your challenge is and where you want to go. Now, the program format for DTM is it's a 12-week program. It's really 12 weeks where we have a rhythm each week of you learning material through an asynchronous environment, which allows you to learn when you want to learn. And then we have come together once a week in a synchronous format where we bring everyone together and we work through activities. We don't really present lectures in those times of peer learning, but instead we provide activities where teams work together towards something that's important to them. And that's their applied project. And so we work on this applied project together. Every week, we kind of make it a little bit more complex, a little bit more developed. And by the end of the program, you have a really good understanding, not only of the people you're working with, but also the skills that they have, the skills that you bring. You have a confidence and you've got a solution to, it could be a small or medium or large problem that you're trying to address. So we really like to think of it as applied learning in a peer environment that allows you to be supported by not only the people you work with inside your team, but also the other people in the program and the mentors that are supporting you. So peer-to-peer online sessions are absolutely essential for us and really a big part of the program. And then this idea of mentors who are going to continually look at the outcomes you developed and provide you feedback with the context of healthcare, I think is a really valuable thing. So that's the way we've been putting our programming together, and digital transformation management is, I think, a great example of that. So given all that and the work we're doing, what you also need to know is that after that, you come up with a certificate of completion. So there's a little shot of it there. So that's always good to have. But also we provide you with what we call a digital badge. And that digital badge can go onto your LinkedIn or other places, and it allows people to see the experience and the kind of work that you've done to develop yourself and get yourself ready and enable those skills to make you an effective person in a digital transformation environment. So we want to make sure that the world knows that you're ready to take on more of this technology opportunity. So all that being said, I think one of the things we want to focus on is we've had lots of healthcare professionals, and an example of this one is a story of digital transformation from a person who comes from healthcare. But the story on this one is that in class, they were presenting, Susan here was presenting, and the person who was presenting next actually came from YVR. And in YVR, they were talking about how their passengers come to kiosks and understand what the next step is in their process. They got passports, they got to do all that kind of stuff. And so she thought, well, could that happen in a hospital? When somebody walks into a hospital, it's pretty intimidating. And where do I go next? And how do I find things? And where do I go? And so having some ability to kind of take that journey and move it forward was what the person here learned as an example of that. And so digital transformation, Sam said, digital transformation program offers just a fantastic opportunity for cross-industry learning. And that's what she was talking about. Can I think of a hospital like an airport? And can I think of a kiosk as an opportunity for guiding that vision? So I think these are important things for us to understand and work on. That's what comes out of this opportunity to work with other people in the environment. So that's an example, just one example of the people who've gone through the program. So I want to stop here a little bit and just make sure that you understand our commitments, SFU makes, and why we offer these programs, and why it's important that you know that we're here to support healthcare even in times of challenge. So we think that together we're building a resilient Canadian healthcare system. And SFU is a small part of that effort, but a part nevertheless, and an important component. And we think this is really important as a public university to be saying that this is part of our mandate. This is something that we want to support. And we think that effort begins with people and the people who are going to drive innovation. And we are hearing from our panelists, and we're hearing from people all over the industry that getting confidence, understanding, and developing skills, thinking from a system perspective, cooperating, collaborating, co-creating, bringing in an attitude of supporting change, but always a change, not just for technology, but can we give that gift of time that hopefully technology will find, so we can allow people to spend more effective time really serving the people that they've been trained to serve in ways that I think are very important. So we are offering this, and that's an important thing. So we're thinking about trying to build capacity for the actions that are going to be necessary in the future. And, as one person said here, another participant, I've been applying on different projects, and every topic we cover, I try to use it to support the units that need help with digital transformation. That to me is when we are building capacity. that gets me past the discussion of our program. And now I think I'd love to open it up to discussions that we would have from audience Q&A. So if you guys are ready, Rachel, Carly, and Sheazin, are you guys ready to be on the hot seat a little bit in terms of the questions coming? I'd love to start with you. Is that okay?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay, so first question comes from Ewan, and we've heard of the importance of engaging people in digital transformation. And we're thinking what's being asked is, what are some strategies if vendor organizations are kind of outside your space for building solutions in the industry? So how do you bring those people from sometimes very different organizational backgrounds into that solution orientation? So if it's okay, I'm going to start with Sheazin first, then Rachel, and then Carly, if that's okay. Sheazin?
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. And I think it's there's going to be a lot of learning exchanged in that space to begin with. But there are structures in what's called an innovation-driven ecosystem. Again, there's frameworks around how to do this, to do it effectively, do it efficiently, and do it at a lower cost, because otherwise you could end up, you want to gain value as an organization, and the vendor also wants to gain value, but there has to be mutual benefits for both of you. It does happen globally. We do bring people in as a test bed to sometimes co-create solutions that are outside of healthcare. And many times the best solutions in healthcare have come from outside of healthcare. So I think the short answer to sum up actually is that you do need to create that space to experiment and dialogue, but make sure you structure it in a way that you're not spinning for too long, but you're doing it in an efficient way. So there is a cross exchange of learnings and the how, but similar to how you would bring your stakeholders in to inform, they also need to be informed the other way. And I'll say, even if you get vendors from outside of Canada coming in, there's also a learning curve there, and if they're coming from health itself. So it's kind of the same approach that you would take.
So a place where you can explore, but you have an end to that process where you're going to come out of that circle and hopefully come up with something. Rachel, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So for this one, I think it depends on where you are in the space, because if you're like a nonprofit and you're partnered with the health system, that path is going to look very different than if you are, for example, a for-profit vendor. But really, both of those categories should be having these conversations with users if they want to build the right solutions.
Yeah.
I'll maybe focus a little more on the vendor lens, just because that was originally my background. If you already have a product out and you have customers, if your product team is any good, they're going to be talking to your users very regularly. You're going to know who your physician champions are, who's like really excited to give you feedback. And then you're going to know how many of those people realistically you need to go out, because it's more than one. Please don't just talk to one and assume that's the thing.
Yeah.
And if they're your users, generally they will often just do that for you for free. You can have conferences and user groups. If you do not have users yet, if you are pre-release, that becomes more complicated. Generally, people are not going to want to give you input for free for a for-profit vendor. So you can still work through some of these avenues potentially. Like if you need to talk to patients, you can still potentially go through something like a more formal patient recruitment, but like you should absolutely have a budget. I think kind of preferably everyone should have a budget if they're engaging patients under sort of the scales that are put out for that thing through like HEC. For clinicians, it would be really great if you can get a clinician co-founder as a starting point, or if you can get a clinician on as an advisor to your company, and then they can help you sort of navigate what that might look like to get appropriate feedback in the groups that you need. Having that like subject matter expertise is great. And then if you are a nonprofit, then you can often sort of more robustly engage with like Patient Voices Network and some of the formal channels through like, Doctors of BC or that sort of a thing through the professional organizations.
That gives you lots of examples of how you can do it. It looks like there's a question on change, which I think is related to this, Rachel. We'll come back to that. But Carly, maybe your thoughts about building a solution with industry and how do you bring vendors in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not a ton to add. I think Sheazin and Rachel summarized it really well, but I do think if you are coming up from outside of healthcare, then it's really important to spend time really understanding the clinical environment before trying to build a solution, because of all the things we mentioned. And, healthcare workflows are complex, time sensitive. And so the assumptions from other organizations or other industries don't always translate into a healthcare context. So I would say definitely partnering as directly with clinicians as you can early, would be key to success.
And often organizations have like different cycles. So when you think about vendors and what they're trying to accomplish and what healthcare is trying to accomplish, it's hard to get that time frame where people are thinking in the same way. So I can totally see that. I think if it's okay, Carly, I'm going to come back to you to start off our change management. But we had another question that came in about, well, what's that mentorship piece you talked about, Andrew, on the DTM? And it just so happens we happen to have a mentor who's been working with us. So I'm going to let Sheazin make that description. But Rachel, you've also taken the program, so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that. So, but Sheazin, can you tell us a little bit about what the heck does a mentor do when we're in this program?
Well, I feel privileged to actually be a mentor. So I attend the classes every week, and I get to look at their weekly assignments or discussions and comment on it, and then participate in those weekly classes in breakout sessions. It's actually quite live. It's quite interactive, and it reinforces the asynchronous learning, which is online. And so I get to share some of my experiences I learn, and there's a conversation that goes back and forth. I can also say that we're at the halfway point of this particular cohort, and I've seen such amazing transformation in the way the participants are thinking from the first discussion to where they are today. So I get to be part of those discussions, and many times I've heard, I think in the past week in particular, I was thinking this way, I'm now thinking this way, right?
Right.
And so as a mentor, it's very heartwarming to see that. And so it's really supporting the participants the best way that I can. And each week there's a different professor or academic lead. And so it's really nice in this kind of ecosystem of how the program has been set up.
Yeah, I think what we do in DTM is we have multiple instructors providing content, but what we found we needed was the context. And that's what the mentor's providing. So Sheazin, great example, great kind of description of what that role is. And it is about discussion and development and watching the growth and the journey. So that's really important. And Rachel, you've been a part of our programming. So I'd love to, if you had any thoughts about that, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, I was one of the earliest
You
cohorts.
were, yes.
Yeah, I was like right in at the beginning. And even then it was fantastic, like really high quality, specialized industry mentors that had come in to just share knowledge and support the cohort. So they were fantastic and very well selected. I was not surprised to hear Sheazin was mentoring as well. Like I feel like they're bringing a lot of people in who just deeply know the industry. They've been doing this forever. They have tons of lived experience, and they can really help people sort of work through some of the challenges they're seeing in the day-to-day. And not to undersell the peer learning aspect of this either. So if you're like I specialize in digital transformation in healthcare, I took this just to kind of like see what was going to come out of it at the time. It's great. Coursework was great, but the value of being in these small group conversations regularly with peers who are working on enterprise-wide digital transformation at the same time that you are in healthcare, sometimes not always in healthcare, sometimes with different lenses coming in, to Andrew's point earlier, it's really like having a little mini community of practice for a couple of months, right?
Yeah.
Where you can work through some pretty intense problems and get people's perspectives on it and see what's worked and what's not worked elsewhere. It's great all around.
That's a great description. So thanks. And thanks for being one of the first through. It always is a little bit of a risk when you go into that, but I think it's been really a successful program. So thank you so much for helping us develop and guide it. And Carly, I said I'd come back to you on change management. There's a question here about how to handle change management in an organizational-wide initiative. That's a big challenge. I'd love to hear how you kind of approach it, and then I'd love to hear from the others about that.
Sure, yeah, it's a really good question. And I think when we look at organizational wide change management, it's a balance between, the overall structure, but also having flexibility within that too. I think it's important to align expectations and leadership early so that there's, a shared understanding of why we're making the change and how this is actually going to, impact your day-to-day work. So I think focusing on really clear and practical communication to make sure that people understand, not just the why, but also how this is going to look for them in their day-to-day. I think it's also really important to identify, if it's an internal change, then identifying key internal champions across the different departments or teams who can then help reinforce the change locally and then across the broader organization as well. So I think peer-to-peer support can be applied internally and also when working with clinicians in that setting as well.
That's great, Carly. I think maybe, Rachel, if I can come to you, one of the things I also think about is when you bring the change management to a project. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake I see people make over and over is they'll start developing something, building it, and then as you get ready to release, people will start thinking about change management, and that is not how change management works. Like that starts the day that you think you're going to move forward with this as a project, right? Like it is fully end to end. It starts at the beginning and it ends again, not at go live, but that period of post go live where you're really reinforcing and supporting these users through the change. And it often doesn't work that way. And the other thing is just making sure it's bi-directional communication. So you really want to have that trust being built and those channels open for people to, like, not only for you to communicate to them, but for them to give you feedback on what they're concerned about, on things that they're not sure are going to work, because often that can inform the project and it can inform the solution development. And sometimes those are really critical things. And if people don't trust you, they're not going to tell you. Or if you haven't opened up like how they can tell you, they're not going to bother sharing that because they just figure you don't care. And those are really big.
I love hearing that because I think that's the number one piece I like to tell people is change starts the very first day that you start working together, building that trust and confidence, communication. That's where change begins. And I really love hearing that, Rachel, you put it right in there. I think you said the same thing, Carly, about that communication right up front. I know you've done a ton of change, Sheazin, but I was hoping maybe you could address this question because I also know you did a lot of work in AI. And as we move from this pilotitis, kind of lots of pilots to implementing, and then you get this, what the question is, what's the single most critical governance step to ensure that these AI tools actually reduce clinical burnout rather than adding to the administrative load? How have you been able to do that? See, I know you got a ton of lived experience in this one.
Yeah, you know, when I'm going to say single most, we just learned about, the silver bullets this past week in the program. There is no bullet really. Governance needs to be very clear. It needs to be co-created with the organization, and you need to differentiate between what is IT governance, AI governance, and data governance. Like you really need to get sound in the differentiations of that. You need to have the right stakeholders there. And so in terms of the AI tools, there's a lot out there. And so understanding some of that and having the expertise to do that. Now you're kind of building and moving and doing it at the same time. You have some very foundational stuff you need to ensure, from guardrailing the system that's housing the AI, making sure that, you're not going to compromise that, but also internally you're redesigning some of your, privacy impact, security threat, risk assessment processes. So those processes are also getting redesigned. So I'm not sure if there's a single most critical governance. You have to look at it in a multi-prong. And I just think overall for transformation, you're really looking at the tech, operations, people, culture, sitting in the change, all of it sitting in this change. So you, as a leader in the space, you're kind of managing the traditional and the modernization at the same time. But you're not focused on one thing. You're actually having to focus on a lot of things. So you do get stretched in many different areas, and you have to understand that systems thinking that Rachel actually brought up before as well. You do have to be a systems thinker. In terms of reducing clinical burnout, you do have to, again, understand the problem, where you're putting it at. You can't be superfluous or, just kind of come up with an idea and build it. You do need to understand your current state. You do need to understand the workflows, and you do need to co-create. And I think ground up, grassroots, that's where we've had the biggest success. So there's multiple teams working cross-functionally to achieve this. So
that's great. Thanks, Sheazin. As I say, lots of experience in that, and I can see it coming through. We have time for one more question, and I'd love to get each of our panelists an opportunity to address it. And that's about digital investments that sometimes fail to scale because maybe we didn't think about ROI. But when you come to healthcare, what the heck is ROI? So how do you evaluate those value metrics to make sure you're not just focused on cost saving, but you're really thinking about improved patient outcomes or increased capacity for those clinical people? So if it's okay, I'm going to start with Rachel, then Carly, and then give Sheazin the last word, if that's okay. So Rachel, what are your thoughts on that?
So I think having a really clear idea back to like what benefits do you actually want to get out of this project? What are you actually trying to solve here? And then really focusing in on, and then how are we going to measure that thing when this is done? Is it like, is user satisfaction something here? Is usability, like perceived usability? Are you looking to sort of, for example, with remote patient monitoring, like reduce the number of ER admissions for complex care patients? And then actually following up on those. And even like not post project, but during the project, as an example, in a procurement process for like an enterprise-wide solution, we built in usability testing, and it was a scored metric for the RFP. It was weighted, and we put products in front of our clinicians, and we built that into how we were procuring, because if it meets everything on paper, we get it out to people, and they're like, I never want to look at this again. Like, get it out of my face. That's not going to be a successful implementation.
No.
We absolutely had products that people were like, I will riot if you procure this. Do not do this. And it's incredibly valuable to look at what's going to be important to you all the way through the project as well as after the
Yeah,
project.
that's pretty clear too. I'm glad you're picking up that message. Carly, we got just a minute or two, so we'd love to hear your thoughts, and then Sheazin, you can wrap it.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to add to that, I think it's a great question because the traditional, just looking at cost savings, it doesn't really fully capture the value in healthcare. So I think it's important to shift instead to looking at, did this tool, did it reduce the time spent on administrative tasks? And did it allow our providers, our clinicians to spend more time seeing their patients and spending more time with each patient. So I think in practice, this means really combining both the quantitative and the qualitative measures and looking at it more holistically.
Right. It's not just about the money for sure. And then Sheazin, I got 30 seconds for you if you want to wrap it in that.
Yeah, I agree with Rachel and Carly. I'll just say that there's the digital solutions here, implementing like a software or solution to digitize the workflows. That for me is a little different than the AI implementation. There's a little bit more deterministic ROI in the first one, and AI is more probabilistic. So I think understanding those two differences is important. And I will speak from a lens of AI right now. You actually are starting with a whole new way of measuring, and your KPIs, everything has to be reimagined in the space because you are creating something that's almost unprecedented or unknown. So I think this is a creative space that many organizations now get to and say, okay, what is the right, ROI measures, or what are we actually compounding over time? Because there's a compounding investment that's happening here. So I'll end with that.
Well, given all those challenges, we're bravely going forward towards digital transformation in health. And I just want to thank the panelists so much. Rachel, Carly, and Sheazin, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and knowledge. And I hope this has been beneficial to the people watching. I really enjoyed our discussion, and I hope that we're able to give you a little bit more information. So again, thank you very much, and all the best to you.